California's Gold is produced in association with KCET Los Angeles and is seen statewide on California Public Television. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association. Look at these trees. They are spectacular. Good morning, everybody. Here we are in beautiful Sequoia National Park, and we have come here for a very special day, a day of rediscovery and rededication. This is going to be a very exciting day, a day that's full of history that's not only important to our state, but to our entire nation as well. And all the elements are here. The people, the family, the history, the geography, the rediscovery, the rededication. All of it very much a part of California's gold. The sequoias are magnificent trees, and people come to Sequoia National Park from all over the world to marvel at them. We were in the park to visit one particular tree, hear its story, and in so doing, celebrate the life of a rather remarkable man. Well, we're standing here under one of these beautiful giant sequoia trees with Bill Tweed, who is the park naturalist here at Sequoia National Park. I guess we need to start this whole thing off by asking, who was Colonel Charles Young and why was he here in this park?
Well, Charles Young is an amazing story, one of those models that gives us hope for history and gives us hope for our future. A black American born on the Ohio River at the end of the Civil War, managed through enormous diligence not only to get himself into West Point, a terribly difficult thing to do for a black man in the 19th century, but even more to get back out of West Point as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army. And as such, he was, oh, by the way, the third black man in America to ever manage to accomplish that goal. What that did was that put him into the Army in the late 19th century. And one of the things the Army did in the 19th century and early 20th century was look after national parks. This is before we'd invented park rangers. The park ranger system we have today for the federal parks was not created until 1916. Prior to that, the protection of Sequoia Park fell to the Army. And every summer, from starting in 1891, after the park had been created, soldiers were sent here. And what's significant goes back to this centennial we're celebrating this year. It was 100 years ago this summer, in 1903, that Charles Young arrived here in Sequoia National Park with two companies from the 9th U.S. Cavalry. These were Buffalo soldiers, black soldiers with one of the very few black officers with a job. Their job was first to protect the park and then to continue development work that had begun and had been carried on in sort of a, shall we say, a dilatory fashion, had not been moving very fast. And Young brought to this park this same degree of determined energy he had brought to West Point. He was going to make this work. And in one summer, they completed the first road here to Giant Forest that had been languishing for several years, extended it on out to the Morro Rock roads we still use today. They built the first trails up on Mount Whitney. They did the first fencing of the General Sherman and General Grant trees, sort of recognizing the threat of visitors would bring to parks. He even managed to get options on all the private inholdings in the park, though Congress never bothered to spend any money to buy them at that time. So he accomplished an enormous amount in this one short summer. And the final thing he did was he named a tree. And his soldiers asked him to name a tree after himself. And the modest man he was, he said no. But what I will do is I'll name this tree after the black American I respect the most. And that man was Booker T. Washington, the famous black educator of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And so, by the end of 1903, the Army had come, and these black troopers had built the roads, had changed this park forever, had really begun its modern history, and had left behind a monument to their race and to their pride in their race, the Booker T. Washington tree.
The Booker T. Washington tree, a tree that had been named by Colonel Young back in 1903. but in fact, over the years had disappeared from the pages of history and had been totally forgotten. Well, on this day, that would be corrected, because a large group of Colonel Young's descendants, accompanied by a large group of Booker T. Washington's descendants, gathered under the newly rediscovered tree to celebrate this wonderful page of forgotten California Sequoia history. Well, this is very exciting for the whole family, isn't it?
This is tremendously exciting. We had no idea about this till about 8 months ago when we got notified by the National Park Service.
This really, there's so many things, so many honors that have come Booker T. Washington's way over the years. This must have been a huge surprise for everybody in the family.
Yeah, I think when you talk with my aunt and my mom, they'll tell you they've been into a lot of ceremonies, but this is really icing on the cake. This is tremendous.
Now the family, where's the Booker T. Washington family? All of you right out here in front. You have traveled here from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
And what kind of a surprise is it? Is this the first time you've ever been in front of a tree this size?
The first time, yes. And as the oldest living direct descendant at 82 years old, it's most impressive to me. It's very emotional that something like this that God made, that God put on this earth, is now dedicated to my grandfather.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's been dedicated to him for a long time. It just kind of fell through the cracks of history.
Now that they found it, and now that it's recognized again, it's greatly appreciated.
Yeah. Now, how many family members are here?
About 17.
So a lot of people traveled here from different parts of the country to be here for this day.
Exactly.
And I know there are a lot of VIPs here, and I know there are a lot of picture taking and all of this going on. But in a way, it's a very poignant moment, isn't it?
Yes, very. Very much so. Very emotional.
What do you think he would think of this? Do you think he ever knew?
Well, I think that his emphasis on educating and not all the recognition came to him because of his work, but his interest was in seeing that members of our race achieve the maximum that they could achieve. And I don't think his emphasis, he got it because he did what he did, but I don't think he sought the recognition. Of course he was proud of it, and we are doubly proud of it.
Do you think he ever knew that this tree was named for him?
I don't know that.
What do you think? Do you think, or is this just one of those obscure bits of history?
You know, I don't know. I would.
In 1903, I have no idea whether he knew about it, because I've never read anything in the history that I've read, and I've never read anything that he wrote in the material that he wrote about, you know, Sequoia, a tree being named for him. But now I'll go back and research it.
And this is what's interesting right here. Right behind you is one of the descendants of Colonel Young, who named this.
All three of them.
Right, who named this tree.
And had it not been for their ancestor, this tree wouldn't have been named for Booker Washington.
Yeah. What do you feel about that being here today?
We're very excited, first of all, for our family, because this is a monumental occasion for us to be able to link some lineage and genealogical tree. We knew a lot about, Charles Young was my great-grandfather, and I knew a lot about his military exploits, but I had no idea that he was ever the superintendent at Sequoia here. And this is really educational experience for us, as well as.
So the tree came as a surprise to you as well.
Very much.
Actually, to me, it came as a surprise. I knew about Charles Young and the fact that he had graduated from West Point, as I thought the first, but they said the third black graduate of West Point. But I had no idea that he had been responsible for the development of the road and the superintendency for that year that he was in the Park Service. And really, when you look at this park and what he did here, the year that he was here, it's just monumental.
Isn't it interesting that the family members themselves are still learning history about their family.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's very exciting. It's a lifetime experience that we'll cherish forever.
Yeah.
Just to know about this.
And we formed a connection that we didn't know we had.
So now we're getting the two families.
And to get to meet descendants of Booker T. Washington's family, it's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, actually, two very prominent families who probably until this day never
knew there was
met.
a connection.
Well, no doubt about it, the tree is monumental. This day is monumental. And what both these men did in their time
Yes.
is monumental.
Yes.
It all fits together.
We're very
And we're
proud.
all very proud.
Now, here's the guy who actually physically found the tree. How did that happen?
Well, I guess I suppose I rediscovered the tree. I was basically compiling information about Charles Young and got in touch with Floyd Thomas at Wilberforce University, where Young's papers are kept. And he asked over the phone if I'd heard of the Booker T. Washington tree, which I hadn't. And he said, well, we have a photograph of a very large tree with a sign that says Booker T. Washington, and I suppose it might be a sequoia. And so he immediately faxed it to me, and it took a couple of months, I guess, to put it all together. But our chief interpreter, Bill Tweed, suggested it was probably on this road, which was the stretch that was constructed in the summer of '03. And so I spent a morning walking down the road with the photograph, and
So wait a minute, you had the photograph that had been faxed you from,
it was a fax of a Xerox from Wilberforce University, yes,
where is that?
in Ohio, southern Ohio.
Okay, which is where Colonel Young was from.
Exactly,
Okay,
yes. and
so
where he
you
was
were
a-
walking down the road and you looked over here and you saw this tree.
That
And
was
what
essentially-
made you think that this was the Booker T. Washington tree?
Well, if the truth be told, it was actually the tree behind that gave
I
it
thought
away.
that was the one.
No, I knew this was the tree because of the sign in the photograph, but in the photograph in the background, you can see this tree as well.
Uh-huh.
And it has that distinctive ring, which showed up nicely in the fax.
This is a big tree now, but it was a big tree then. So this tree basically looks about like it did in 1903 when it was named the Booker T. Washington tree.
Yes, 100 years isn't very long for a sequoia. This tree's probably 2,000 years old, if I as a guess. And sequoias tend to grow the majority of their height anyhow in 100 years. So this has been a large tree for a long time.
Now, there was something else here that gave you the tip-off that this was the Booker T. Washington tree.
And several months later, we were here with some state parks colleagues, and Ted Jackson noticed that the nail is still in the tree.
The nail, what nail?
The nail that held the sign up, the original sign from
That fell down.
Yep.
Where is the nail? Is it actually, can we see the nail?
The nail is about 8 feet up, maybe 10 feet.
Boy, oh, there it is. Now that's obscure,
Yes, it was a surprise. It took a very observant
but that
to find
literally confirms
Yeah, I
that
think
this was the tree.
Yeah, it reassured my my initial impression.
But there were no, as the curator of the park, you've searched, there are no pictures of Colonel Young ever taken in front of this tree.
No, not that I've seen.
There were no there was only one known photograph of the tree with Booker T. Washington's name on that little sign on there.
That was all we had to go on.
So once the sign fell down, this tree went back in time and became an unnamed huge sequoia tree.
That's exactly what happened. And who knows when the sign fell.
Yeah.
But by the 1920s, when the first guidebooks were starting to be written about the park, and the name sequoias would be put on a map and described, it was not in those.
Was the
guidebooks.
Booker T. Washington tree ever in any brochures or written material about Sequoia National Park?
Not that I've ever seen or been able to uncover.
A new old tree in your park.
Well, it's just so fantastic. You know, this tree was like lost for decades, and now it's kind of like come back to all of our awareness and to our consciousness. It's going to be enjoyed by family members and public again. Plus, in my view, it just adds to the ambiance of national parks. National parks sometimes are thought of, well, good places for trees, but here is something that's a great place for American culture, society, families.
Well, it puts a human face on it, too, because here are the descendants of the guy who was the superintendent here in 1903 and the descendants of Booker T. Washington, for whom the tree was named.
Exactly. This is a fantastic family situation here because we can all see Colonel Young, who was just a wonderful person and a groundbreaker in his time, and named a tree after another groundbreaker, Booker T. Washington, who led really African-American education 100 years ago. Two great Americans.
All right, now that we've talked about the great Americans, let's talk about for just a minute, how could a tree get lost for 100 years? Because it really kind of disappeared. I mean, the tree was always here, but the fact that it was the Booker T. Washington tree really slipped through the cracks.
And exactly how that happened, I don't know if any of us know. However, we must say, about 7 decades ago, the original park headquarters burned down. And I would bet that with that building burning down, a lot of records were lost.
And there is a photograph of this tree with the sign Booker T. Washington tree on it.
Yes.
It could have been as simple as the sign blew off, it never got put back up, time went on, staffs changed, and over the years it just got a little fuzzy.
Well, and you know, this is a very pleasant day up here today, but on many winters there'll be 15 feet of snow here. So easily that sign could have gotten broken off by snow, gotten buried, have leaves fall on it, just getting lost. And then with staff evolution, people transferring, it just vanished from consciousness.
Well, it's back in the record books now. You got a nice, well-lettered and constructed sign down there.
Yes.
So I don't think it's gonna fall off the. It's not gonna fall out of the history books now, is it?
We're not going to let this go through any cracks ever again because we've got it now on video and photographs. We've got it records. And we've got now Ward wrote a book about rediscovering the tree, so it's going to definitely stay in everybody's forefront from now on.
And you know what? And now it will be a destination for tourists from all over the world to come and see, as well as the other great trees in the Sequoia National Park, the Booker T. Washington tree.
That's correct. And one of the great things about this tree, of course, is the two people involved with it. Colonel Young as well as Booker T. Washington. There's the story of the tree, but there's the story of these two individuals as well. So this is going to attract people both interested in natural science, but also interested in American culture.
Now this is interesting. We're meeting up with Trooper Jones here, who is representing the Buffalo Soldiers back in history, and this is very interesting. You got a bunch of Buffalo Soldiers here today.
Absolutely. We have a chapter here, which I belong to, which is the Northern California chapter, and we also have a chapter from Southern California out of LA.
And it's a very appropriate day that you're here in Sequoia National Park because the Buffalo Soldiers, the chapter they played here in these parks back at the turn of the century, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, is a very interesting story, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's one of the stories that goes unnoticed, or untold, rather, because of the fact that Buffalo Soldiers have a tremendous history for fighting the Indian Wars, Spanish-American Wars, and also in Cuba and whatnot. So they didn't know that after those wars stopped, that there was other duties for the Buffalo Soldiers to do. And one of those duties was to go and patrol the state parks. And that's exactly what they've done.
And what do you think it would have been like out here for black soldiers out in the middle of nowhere out here in these beautiful big parks for months at a time working, patrolling, doing whatever duties it was they had to do.
It definitely wasn't easy. As you can see, these wool uniforms do not definitely lend themselves to a cool environment. So obviously the elements had to take their toll on them as well as their animals, but yet their courage and their admiration and their self-esteem kept them going, and they really had a whole lot to look forward to. So I would say that you know, the character of these men were just tenfold.
And as far as Colonel Charles Young is concerned, is that a name that, being a Buffalo Soldier reenactor today, you had heard of before?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There are very few officers, as a matter of fact. There were only several, I believe, that came out of the West Point Academy. Charles Young was one of them. So he's a very rare individual when it comes down to high-ranking Buffalo soldiers. There weren't many colonels at all.
And what role do you think he played in inspiring his men to greatness out here? Because they really did a lot when they were under his command.
Well, absolutely. I think the men themselves had a great deal of admiration for the man. First of all, he went to West Point Academy, which, like I said, very few blacks actually got a chance to do. So that alone was one outstanding accomplishment. And I think you couldn't do anything but help respect that to begin with. And I think that also bred a good leadership quality within that individual that passed on to his men. And I think his men really appreciated it, knowing as to what he came from, being in the same situation as they were at one particular time. But he took it one step further to try to go and get educated in West Point Academy.
And this is very interesting out here today, because this encampment that you all are having is part of this celebration, this rededication out here this weekend. Do you get you got to get a lot of positive feedback from people who respect what you're doing, but also are surprised at this bit of history?
Oh, absolutely. This is a particular history that has been forgotten in our history books in our school curriculum. That also needs to change. But yes, it's a great opportunity to get a chance to talk to individuals from a wide range of life, different groups, different ethnic groups, and to try to let everybody know what this was really all about, that it's not just a black history, it's American history, and it belongs to all of us.
How important is this tree?
It's symbolic. You know, it's symbolic of America's past, of our heritage. It tells a story about a people who were enslaved in this country, but who overcame tremendous obstacles in order to educate themselves and integrate themselves into society. So you have a wonderful symbol here of a people overcoming, and a story about American heritage.
And isn't it interesting that Colonel Young chose to name the tree the Booker T. Washington tree, of all the people he could have chosen?
Yeah, and I think he did that because of the influence Booker T. Washington had on his life and on African Americans in this country who were just at that particular point in time beginning to transition into full membership into the society, which we know didn't happen really until the 60s, and it's still a process that's going on. But I think that Colonel Young recognized the important aspect of Booker T. Washington's contribution to that, and it's huge.
Well, after this hectic and full day, we are standing very quietly out here in the forest under this amazing tree in this spectacular forest. It has been a day full of history, and if we have learned anything, Shelton, I think it's that history is so fragile, it is so tenuous, it can so easily be forgotten.
I think that that's absolutely right, Huell, and I think that most histories are forgotten. But a day like today reminds us that even though a history can be forgotten, it can be remembered, it can be retrieved. And even though we can't bring back Booker T. Washington so he can see the sequoia that's named after him, even though we can't bring Charles Young back so he can see what has happened as a result of his naming this tree after Booker T. Washington, we can have that experience right now. And so now it's incumbent upon us to try to remember, to try to hold on, because things pass away and everything around us is passing away. But we can hold on to it if we have the heart and the mind to try to hold.
And there's so many other stories connected with this chapter of this history, stories that we still don't know.
You know, I always feel that most histories are forgotten. Most stories are forgotten. Most people are forgotten. The hundreds of Buffalo soldiers that served in the Sierra Nevada, most of their names, almost all of their names other than Charles Young, have been forgotten. And how many of them walked by this very tree? How many of them walked through this very forest? And how many of them are remembered? Most of them are forgotten. And some of the descendants of those soldiers may have been here in this very forest and had no idea that their great-grandfather or their grandfather was one of the soldiers entrusted with the protection of Sequoia National Park or Yosemite National Park for that matter. And lost history, what do you do with a lost history? How do you find a lost history if you don't know it's been lost?
So what do we take away from all of this?
I think what we take away from this is that even though something can disappear, if we have the mind and the heart, it can be retrieved. All we have to do, like Ward Eldridge did, finding that little nail on top of that tree, knowing that at one time a sign there that read Booker T. Washington Tree, and now it was forgotten, and now it's been remembered again. So we just have to have the effort and the will to try to hold on to what's been lost, try to regain it, and then do something about it and do something with it. And that's really, for me, what today has all been about, is doing something with what we know happened and making it real again.
Well, it has definitely been a day of rediscovery and rededication. Let's just stand out from beside this tree in this quiet forest and kind of take a look at it again. This amazing tree holding this history inside. History that was brought back to life today. This wonderful day filled with California's gold. Doesn't get any better than today. Hello, everybody. I'm Huell Hauser, and I sure hope you enjoyed our visit to the historic Booker T. Washington tree in Sequoia National Park. If you'd like to see this adventure again or share it with family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy of it to your local school or library, it's available on video cassette or on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727 and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.